Imagine you're handed the steering wheel of a Formula One car. Like, you have total control.
Right.
You dictate the speed, you navigate the turns, you're making, every single split-second strategic decision on that track.
And you're doing all the work, basically.
Exactly. You race, you win, you cross the finish line first. But, and here's the catch, you agreed on day one, like before you even put the helmet on, that the multi-million-dollar prize money goes entirely to a stranger.
Someone you have literally never met.
Right, someone you've never met.
Mm.
Today, we are looking at a corporate blueprint that asks startup founders to do exactly that.
It's just wild because it completely inverts the fundamental incentive structure of Silicon Valley, really. You maintain the absolute power of the driver, right?
Yeah.
But the wealth of the victory is immediately deployed to build a completely different kind of infrastructure.
Yeah. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are unpacking an incredibly provocative source text today, and it's titled Netizen, Equity Engineering in the Transition to Abundance.
Which is quite a title.
It really is. And honestly, whether you're, a founder sketching out a startup idea right now, or an investor managing a massive portfolio, or just someone listening who is fascinated by where this wild AI-driven economy is heading. I mean, this is a paradigm-shifting concept.
It really challenges everything we assume about capitalism.
Because we are hurtling toward this prophesied age of abundance, right? Driven by artificial intelligence and robotics. But according to the text, there is a massive structural flaw in the code.
And the flaw isn't the technology itself. I think that's super important to clarify right off the bat.
Yeah, the tech is doing exactly what it's supposed to do.
Right. We are building the tools of abundance. The flaw is the distribution loop.
Yeah.
The wealth generated by all this abundance is, well, it's getting trapped in a systemic bottleneck.
Trapped, exactly.
So what we're exploring today is this concept called equity engineering.
Yeah.
It's an attempt to fix that bottleneck, but not through, government policy or charity.
Right, which is what we usually jump to.
Yeah, exactly. It's about rewriting the actual DNA of a corporation before it even launches.
Specifically, we're looking at a radical startup blueprint called the 30-30-30-10 formula. And its stated mission, which is bold, is to cure the moral poverty of the tech industry.
Cure the moral poverty.
So extreme global poverty is eliminated not as an afterthought, not as some corporate PR stunt where everyone wears matching T-shirts for a day.
Right, the classic corporate social responsibility photo op.
Exactly. But it's eliminated as a mathematical byproduct of the company scaling.
That is the tension that makes this idea so gripping, I think. We're not talking about philanthropy in the traditional sense here. This is hard-nosed, mathematical corporate structuring.
It's a cap table.
Yes. It asks a really profound question. Can we engineer a capitalist system where you don't have to choose between reaching a trillion-dollar market cap and practically ending extreme poverty?
Can you do both at the exact same time?
Exactly.
So before we get into the weeds of this 30-30-30-10 formula and how it supposedly achieves this, we need to clearly define the problem it's trying to solve. Like, what is the exact failure in our current system?
Well, the premise here revolves around something called the trillion-dollar paradox.
The trillion-dollar paradox.
Right. And when you actually sit and look at the modern startup dream through this lens, it feels, honestly, strangely hollow. The paradox lies in the sheer scale of the contrast.
Okay, unpack that a bit. What kind of contrast?
Think about the life cycle of a massively successful tech founder today. They spend 10 years building a company. It hits a $1 trillion valuation. It reshapes global behavior.
Yeah.
We're talking about technologies that historically would just be considered magic, like artificial intelligence that processes entire libraries in seconds.
Or robotics networks that can basically automate global supply chains overnight. They're literally building the infrastructure for human abundance.
Exactly. They really are. But here is the paradox. Despite all of that wealth creation, despite bending the arc of human capability, the daily reality for the world's poorest people remains absolutely unchanged.
Unchanged? Wow.
We've constructed this massive engine of wealth, but it operates in a vacuum.
The phrase the source uses to describe the reality of those left behind is brutal arithmetic.
It's a heavy phrase.
It's chilling, brutal arithmetic, but it strips away all the political rhetoric, right? Brutal arithmetic just means too little food, too little health care, too little stability. The numbers at the bottom simply do not add up to survival.
Right.
And the core argument here is that extreme poverty persists today not because the Earth lacks resources. Like, we have more resources, more capital, and more caloric output than at any point in the history of our species.
It's a distribution problem.
Exactly. The suffering exists purely because of a lack of distribution.
If we look at this mechanically, it's like an algorithm with a missing line of code. The wealth generation function, it executes perfectly.
Well,
The tech empires of the last 30 years, which conquer attention, behavior, logistics, labor markets through code and data, they generate staggering spoils. But there is no output command directing that wealth to the surrounding environment.
it just hovers there.
Right, so the wealth is generated, but it gets locked in what the text calls a glass vault.
A glass vault.
Yeah,
Because you can see it.
exactly. It's highly visible. You see stock valuations ballooning, market caps soaring, new billionaires minted every quarter.
It's the great illusion of paper wealth.
Yes. The wealth is visible through the glass vault, but it's rarely consumed by the people who hold it, and it's almost never transferred meaningfully to those who are desperate for it.
And I think it's really crucial to point out that this isn't an indictment of individual morality.
No, not at all.
Like, the argument isn't wealthy people are evil. The argument is completely structural. The system itself is designed to accumulate and preserve capital. It's engineered to reward ownership over human need.
Exactly. It's just doing what it was built to do.
Oh, wait, let me push back on that for a second, because I can hear a skeptic or maybe a traditional economist saying, hold on, these trillion-dollar companies do distribute wealth. I mean, they create tens of thousands of high-paying jobs. They create entire secondary economies of vendors and developers. Isn't that distribution?
Yeah, that's the standard defense. And they absolutely create localized ecosystems of wealth, yes. But look at the global macro scale. We have built a civilization where the richest individuals in the history of the human race are coexisting with the largest absolute number of human beings living in extreme, agonizing insecurity.
Wow. When you put it like that.
Right. The localized job creation of a tech giant in Silicon Valley or Shenzhen, it doesn't fundamentally alter the brutal arithmetic for a mother in rural Bihar or sub-Saharan Africa. The distribution radius of these companies simply does not extend to the bottom tier of humanity.
Which is just wild when you think about our technological capacity. I mean, we have engineers calculating the precise orbital mechanics to land reusable luxury rockets on a dime in the middle of the ocean.
Literally catching them with mechanical arms.
Yes.
Right.
But we apparently can't figure out a pipeline to get cash to a starving family. We are sprinting toward this sci-fi destination of abundance, but we're completely ignoring the journey. And the core thesis here is the destination is not enough. The journey itself must heal.
And when faced with that glaring imbalance, society almost universally reaches for the exact same set of traditional tools. We try to patch the failing distribution loop using legacy systems.
Right, the traditional safety nets. And I want to be incredibly clear to you listening right now, we are not taking a political side here.
Absolutely not.
We are impartially breaking down the text's critique of conventional redistribution so we can understand why this radically new corporate structure is being proposed. If we're going to talk about a new blueprint, we have to understand why the author thinks the old plumbing is broken.
Right. So the three legacy tools society relies on, according to the text, are wealth taxes, NGOs, and government welfare.
Okay, let's start with wealth taxes.
The fundamental critique here is that taxation is entirely reactive. It attempts to redistribute wealth after it has already been accumulated and locked in that glass vault we talked about.
And what happens when you try to take something out of a billionaire's vault?
Well, political warfare, endless litigation.
Armies of lawyers.
Exactly. You incentivize capital flight, where the wealth simply relocates to a friendlier, lower tax jurisdiction. Wealth taxes become these massive ideological battlegrounds.
Yeah.
But more importantly, from an engineering perspective, even if a wealth tax is successfully levied, the capital rarely reaches the absolute poorest people with the speed and precision required to actually alter their reality. It just gets absorbed into general government coffers.
Okay, so if forced taxation is like a leaky pipe, what about voluntary charity? What about NGOs, the non-governmental organizations? Because there are thousands of incredibly dedicated people working in the nonprofit sector.
Oh, and they do extraordinary localized work. The critique isn't about their intent at all. It's about their operational model at a global scale.
Okay.
The traditional NGO model is often structurally bloated. You have massive administrative overhead. You have layers and layers of intermediaries standing between the donor's dollar and the person who actually needs it.
But wait, organizations like, say, the Gates Foundation have arguably eradicated entire diseases. Polio is practically gone because of traditional NGO infrastructure. Are we really saying a startup side hustle foundation is going to be more operationally effective than a century-old charity infrastructure? That sounds like classic Silicon Valley hubris.
That is a phenomenal pushback, and it highlights the core philosophical difference in the source text. The NGO infrastructure you're talking about is brilliant at targeted scientific interventions like vaccine development and deployment.
Right.
But when it comes to pure, scalable wealth distribution to alleviate day-to-day extreme poverty, the traditional charity model fractures. There's just too much fragmentation. Furthermore, NGOs often suffer from what the text calls donor narrative dependence.
Donor narrative dependence, meaning they have to do what the donors want.
Exactly. They have to shape their missions around what wealthy donors want to fund, which is often high-visibility projects like building schools or hospitals with their names on them, rather than what might actually be the most efficient solution for the recipient.
Okay. So taxes are reactive and start wars. NGOs are fragmented and bloated. That leaves governments.
Right. And while governments obviously have the massive scale required to distribute welfare, they are fundamentally political entities. They are often slow, corruptible, and heavily bureaucratic. The critique here is that government programs are frequently captured by political interests, devolving into vote-buying machinery rather than functioning as pure, efficient human development systems.
So the takeaway from the author isn't necessarily that these institutions should be, burned to the ground. It's that they fundamentally fail at two critical engineering metrics: precision and speed.
Precision and speed, exactly.
If you have a trillion-dollar economic engine generating massive wealth at lightning speed, you cannot rely on a slow, leaky, bureaucratic bucket to catch the overflow and redistribute it.
You need a mechanism that is as native, as precise, and as fast as the tech empire itself, which means you can't bolt it onto the outside of the company after the fact. You have to wire it into the core operating system from day one.
From the ground up.
Yes.
Which brings us to the actual structural breakthrough, the 30-30-30-10 model. But before we get into the hardcore math of how the equity is sliced up, there is a foundational philosophy here.
The guardrails.
Yeah, 6 core values that are supposed to act as the guardrails for this entire corporate culture: working hard, playing by the rules, innovating, respecting people, communicating effectively, and serving others.
Now, I know at first glance, that list sounds like a motivational poster in a corporate break room.
Seriously, work hard, play by the rules. I think I saw that exact phrase cross-stitched at a dentist's office once.
Right. It feels a bit cliche.
Yeah.
But within this specific context, these values are engineered to balance ethical integrity with a relentless, almost aggressive focus on innovation.
Because you can't just be nice.
No, you cannot build a trillion-dollar company just by being nice. You have to compete fiercely in the modern knowledge economy. The values are designed to foster resilience and creativity, ensuring the company survives and thrives. But that final value, serving others, is the anchor. It dictates how the company wins.
And that idea of serving others is the bridge directly into the equity formula. So let's look at the actual blueprint of the 30-30-30-10 model.
Let's do it.
Imagine traditional startup equity like a pie. In the standard Silicon Valley model, the founders and the early venture capitalists basically eat like 80 to 90% of that pie.
They take almost the whole thing.
Right. They leave the remaining crumbs, maybe 10 or 15%, to be fought over by the hundreds or thousands of employees who actually build the product. And society at large, society gets absolutely nothing unless a founder decides to feel philanthropic 30 years later.
This new formula completely shatters that precedent. When the tech startup is founded, the equity is divided into 4 distinct, mathematically balanced slices. 30% goes to the founders, 30% goes to the investors, 30% goes to the team, meaning the employees, and a final, permanent 10% goes to a foundation bearing the company's name.
This departure from industry norms is wild. Why is this specific balance so critical? Like, why not 40-40-20?
Because it fundamentally aligns the long-term interests of all parties. An inclusive, balanced structure is superior for long-term sustainability. Think about it. If you guarantee that the team owns a full 30% of the company and that stake is protected, you are going to attract the absolute top-tier talent on the planet.
Because they actually own a massive chunk of what they're building.
Exactly. And they aren't just going to stay for a year to pad their resumes. They are intensely motivated to grow the company over the long haul. It shifts the company from being this extractive short-term flip for early investors into a durable generational wealth engine.
Okay, let's dig deeply into the mechanics of that, starting with the team's 30%. Because historically, the industry's standard justification for keeping employee equity low is, well, we pay you a competitive salary, you take no initial risk, therefore, you shouldn't expect massive ownership.
And this framework thoroughly rejects that logic. The argument in the text is that founder vision and investor capital are fundamentally inert without a capable team's labor and creativity.
Inert, like they just sit there.
Right. A visionary founder who cannot assemble an elite team achieves nothing but a pitch deck. Millions of dollars sitting in a venture capital bank account do not write code, they do not design interfaces, and they certainly do not close enterprise sales.
Yeah, the money doesn't do the work.
It is the team's daily, grinding execution that transmutes ideas and capital into actual market value.
So if the team is the engine, they deserve to own a massive part of the car. But how does the math actually work over time? Because promising 30% on day one is easy. Maintaining it is where startups usually screw their employees over.
Yeah, the dilution game.
Right. So the blueprint says the company starts with exactly 100 million shares at launch, and that number remains constant for several years post-IPO.
This is where we get into the vital concept of anti-dilution. And I really cannot stress how critical this is. In a traditional startup, an early employee might be granted, say, 10,000 shares. It feels like a lot. But over the next 5 years, the company goes through Series A, Series B, Series C funding rounds. To get that new investor money, the company issues tens of millions of new shares.
So the pie gets bigger, which means the employee's original 10,000 shares represent a smaller and smaller percentage of the total company.
Exactly. Their stake is diluted. But the 30-30-30-10 model implements strict anti-dilution clauses for the team pool. The team's collective slice is permanently locked at 30%.
Hold on. I understand the concept, but mathematically, if venture capitalists are pumping in, I don't know, $500 million in a Series C, and they want equity for that, where does it come from if the team's 30% is locked? Do the founders have to eat the dilution?
That's the genius of a predefined capped ecosystem. If the absolute number of shares is fixed at 100 million, you don't issue new shares to investors. Instead, the investor's 30% pool is structured in stages. As new capital comes in, it buys into the designated investor pool at higher valuations, or earlier investors sell secondary stakes to later investors.
Ooh.
The dilution happens entirely within the capital pool, not at the expense of the labor pool. The team's 30% is a fortress.
That is incredible, a fortress. And the vesting schedule for the team is standardized to 5 years, calculated annually, rounded to the closest quarter. So if you join in February, your first vesting cliff is the end of March the following year.
Very clean, very predictable.
But what absolutely fascinates me is the internal structure of that 30%. Because, I mean, you can't just hand equal shares to the CFO and the junior graphic designer.
No, that wouldn't work.
Right, so the blueprint outlines a hierarchy of 10 equity layers.
It's a very rigorous, transparent stratification. Layer 1 is the board and the CEO. Layer 2 is the executive team, so the CTO, COO, CFO. Layer 3 is vice presidents. Layer 4 is division chiefs. Then it cascades all the way down. Layer 5 managers, Layer 6 team leaders, down to Layer 7 for core team members, and subsequent layers for support roles.
It's totally structured.
Yes. Your equity allocation is a transparent calculation based on your hierarchy layer, your tenure, and how early you joined the company.
Let's ground this in reality for the listener. Put yourself in this company. The blueprint projects a goal of a $10 billion valuation by the year 2030. If this company hits that mark, the numbers are just life-changing.
Staggering.
If you are an executive in Layer 2 holding 1% of the equity, that is worth $100 million. If you are a vice president at 0.5%, you are sitting on $50 million. A division chief at 0.1% has $10 million. Even a core team member down at Layer 7 holding a 0.005% stake has $500,000.
And there are two crucial policies that make this wealth truly accessible. First, sweat equity. Team members do not pay for these shares.
Which is a massive departure from standard startup stock options. Usually, you are granted the option to buy shares at a certain strike price. You still have to come up with tens of thousands of dollars of your own money to exercise them.
Precisely. It creates a massive financial burden, and often employees have to forfeit their equity because they simply can't afford to buy it when they leave the company. This model awards pure equity as a direct reward for contribution. No writing a check to claim what you've already earned.
Just sweat equity.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the second policy is representation. The team actually elects 3 members to a 10-person board of directors.
This embeds the team's voice at the highest level of corporate governance. It's not just like a suggestion box in the hallway, it is structural power. It prevents the founders or investors from making unilateral decisions that could harm the workforce.
It's a true balance of power.
But this raises a massive operational question. If you're handing out these premium equity stakes to the early layers, how does HR manage this in, say, year 7? How do you keep it fair for someone joining the company as employee number 5,000 versus employee number 50?
That's a huge issue in tech.
Right. You don't want to create a corporate aristocracy where the early hires are lords and the new hires are peasants.
A completely valid concern, and the architecture anticipates it. To ensure longevity, the initial 30% allocation reserves a massive portion of equity specifically for future hires. They don't just give it all away in year 1, but they also utilize levers like geography-neutral equity allocations.
Explain that. Geography neutral.
Typically, if you hire a software engineer in San Francisco, you give them more equity than an equivalent engineer in Manila because the quote-unquote market rate is different. This blueprint says the value of the code is the same regardless of where it's written. Therefore, the equity percentage is geography neutral. You get the exact same ownership stake. However, your base cash salary is adjusted for purchasing power parity, or PPP, to ensure a high local standard of living wherever you are. Furthermore, they use paid trial consulting periods before formally granting equity to ensure a perfect mutual fit.
Okay, so that perfectly secures the team's 30%. The labor is protected and incentivized. That leaves 70% of the company pie. We know 10% is the permanent foundation, which we will dive into in a moment, because that is the absolute core of this deep dive.
The foundation is the whole point, really.
Yes, so that leaves 60%. This is where we look at how power and capital are balanced between the visionaries and the money, the founders and the investors.
Let's look at the investors' 30% first. As we touched on earlier, this pool is segmented. The blueprint outlines 10 stages of investment with 3% allocated for each stage. It creates a highly structured, predictable environment for capital. Investors know exactly what slice they're fighting for, and they benefit from the same capped ecosystem stability that protects the team.
Then we have the founders pool, the remaining 30%. And within that pool, the spotlight is really on the founder CEO, who is allocated a 15% stake. But this is where the blueprint drops what I think is the most radical, psychologically demanding concept in the entire document. It's a legal and financial mechanism simply called the split.
This is the paradigm shift. This is where the Formula One analogy we started with really comes to life. The blueprint proposes that of the CEO's 15% stake, 10% of it is split. Legally, the CEO retains the voting rights and full control of the entire 15%. They remain the undisputed leader of the company. But the wealth component of that 10%, the dividends, the stock appreciation, the sheer economic upside, is irrevocably redirected to the 10% foundation.
Okay, wait, let's do the math on that. So if the company hits a $10 billion valuation, the CEO has the voting power of a $1.5 billion stakeholder, but their personal wealth is capped at the remaining 5%, which is $500 million. The other $1 billion goes to the foundation.
Exactly. And the text calls this concept voluntary transcendence.
Voluntary transcendence. Put yourself in that CEO's shoes for a second. You have spent 10 years not sleeping. You have missed your kids' birthdays. You have carried the agonizing stress of payroll and finding product market fit. And you look at $1 billion of equity that you rightfully earned, and you give the economic value away. That requires a psychological rewiring that most of us, frankly, do not possess.
It does.
Yeah.
It absolutely does. But notice the brilliance of the design. It addresses the fundamental ego of the founder without destroying the company. Founders are driven by a need to control their vision, right? To steer the ship. The split allows them to keep their hands firmly on the wheel. They don't lose control to activist investors. But it divorces the power of leadership from the hoarding of astronomical, unusable wealth.
And it's not just the CEO, right? The blueprint states that any shareholder, an investor, a team member has the option to split their shares at any moment. You keep the voting rights, you keep your seat at the table, but you redirect the financial upside.
And because it is entirely voluntary, there is no coercion. There's no taxation battle. It is an opt-in mechanism that allows capitalists to basically say, I am still fiercely competitive. I still want to dominate this market, but I want the spoils of this war to uplift humanity. It transforms the raw engine of capitalism into a moral engine without neutering the incentives that actually drive innovation.
But let me play devil's advocate again. Because why would a venture capitalist ever agree to fund a company where 10% of the foundational equity, plus whatever the CEO voluntarily splits, is siphoned off to a foundation? VCs have a fiduciary duty to maximize returns for their limited partners. Aren't they going to look at this cap table and laugh you out of Sand Hill Road?
A standard VC might. But the argument in the text is that this structure creates an unparalleled competitive advantage. If you offer the team 30% anti-diluted equity, you will attract a caliber of engineering and operational talent that no standard startup can match. You build a better product faster.
Better talent means a better product.
Exactly. Furthermore, the cultural mission generates intense brand loyalty and consumer goodwill. So the pitch to the enlightened investor is, you own a slightly smaller percentage of a pie that is guaranteed to grow infinitely larger and more resilient because of how it is engineered.
Okay, so massive wealth is being generated and redirected. Where is it actually going? Who manages it? That brings us to the beating heart of this entire endeavor, the 10% foundation.
This foundation is not an afterthought. It is not a corporate social responsibility PR campaign spun up by the marketing department on a slow Tuesday. It is permanently hardwired into the equity architecture. It owns 10% of the company outright from inception.
From day one.
From day one. Which means, as the company scales, the foundation scales perfectly in tandem. If the company achieves a $1 trillion market cap, the foundation is holding $100 billion.
The CEO serves as the ex officio chairperson of this foundation for a salary of $1 per year. But the critical distinction is what this foundation does not do. It doesn't build massive, branded corporate headquarters. It doesn't fund elaborate global summits where billionaires eat Wagyu beef and talk about saving the world. It doesn't hire layers and layers of consultants.
Right. It is designed for one hyper-focused operational mandate.
Yeah.
Direct cash transfers to those in the absolute greatest need.
Direct cash.
And this is where we return to the critique of the traditional NGO. The foundation advocates for the radical simplicity and operational perfection of giving money directly to the poorest people on earth. Unconditional cash, no gatekeepers, no complex moral judgments, no 50-page forms making people prove their worthiness to receive aid.
The philosophy here is profound. The author writes that extreme poverty is not a philosophical puzzle. It is not a cultural defect. It is not a moral failure. They redefine poverty entirely as a simple cash flow problem.
Think about the societal biases we hold against the poor. For centuries, poverty has been treated as a lack of character or a lack of intellect. Framing it as a cash flow problem strips all of that away. It acknowledges that people in extreme poverty are constantly managing incredible scarcity.
They're financially exhausted.
Yes. They lack breathing room. They lack buffers against disaster. Direct cash transfers instantly create that margin.
Now, you and I both know the immediate pushback this gets. It's the classic argument against universal basic income or direct relief. If you give people cash without rules, won't they just waste it? Won't they buy alcohol? Won't it destroy their incentive to work?
It's the most common skepticism, and it is largely rooted in paternalism. The Blueprint's response is that overwhelming empirical data shows exactly the opposite. Cash transfers treat the poor as intelligent economic agents.
Meaning they know what they need.
Precisely. A mother in rural Kenya knows exactly what her family needs better than a consultant in Washington, D.C. does. She needs to buy nutrient-dense food. A father needs to pay school fees so his child can stay in class. A teenager needs to buy a bicycle to access a job market 3 villages over.
It restores dignity. It converts charity from a system of control, like, here is a bag of grain, eat this, into a system of empowerment. Here is capital, make your own choices. As the text states, money does not solve everything, but without money, nothing else can begin.
But the real question is, how do you execute that globally without the money being stolen?
Exactly. If you were trying to send billions of dollars into developing nations or fragile states, how does this foundation bypass the local warlords, the corrupt politicians, and the middlemen who traditionally siphon off aid money?
This is where the tech aspect really shines. The Blueprint doesn't just offer a philosophy. It points to a specific, battle-tested technological reality, the Aadhaar UPI framework.
For listeners who haven't tracked India's tech development over the last decade, you really need to understand this. Aadhaar is the world's largest biometric digital identity program. It gave over 1 billion people a verifiable digital identity. And UPI, the Unified Payments Interface, is a system that allows for instant, frictionless digital money transfers between bank accounts via mobile phones.
And when you connect verifiable biometric identity with instant digital payments, you achieve something historically unprecedented. You bypass the corruption entirely.
Does it go straight to the person?
Exactly. You can send capital directly from the foundation's endowment straight into the digital wallet of a human being living in a remote village, instantly and at near zero cost. The biometric verification means the warlord cannot steal it. The instant routing means the corrupt official cannot tax it. The blueprint calls this the global poverty rail.
The global poverty rail. And the vision isn't just to use this in India. The 10% Foundation's mandate would be to export this exact technological infrastructure, to partner with governments and tech sectors in sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia to build these global poverty rails everywhere.
It's akin to how Silicon Valley companies laid the undersea cables for the global internet. This foundation would lay the digital infrastructure for global human relief.
Which forces us to look at the psychological and cultural impact of all this. Because when you wire a massive, mathematically sound poverty elimination engine directly into the core architecture of a tech startup, you aren't just changing the economics, you are fundamentally altering the psychology of every single employee.
Think about the standard corporate grind. What is everyone obsessing over? How do we win? How do we increase annual recurring revenue by 20%? How do we crush the competitor's market share? But this structure forcibly changes the question. The team stops asking just, how do we win? And starts asking, how do we win in a way that heals the world?
Because the two goals are no longer mutually exclusive. In fact, they're inextricably linked. Every corporate milestone is redefined. A massive product launch isn't just a revenue event that buys the CEO a new yacht. It is a poverty reduction event.
Right. Every new enterprise contract signed is another channel of human uplift. The sales team, the engineers, the HR department, they all know that their daily grind is directly funding the survival and dignity of the poorest people on Earth.
The blueprint emphasizes this idea that all business is service. If a company forgets that, it becomes predatory. It becomes an extractive machine optimizing only for paper wealth. But if an organization trains itself to serve the most vulnerable humans on Earth with profound efficiency and respect, that fundamentally upgrades their operational capability.
Service is a muscle, as the text notes. If your corporate DNA is wired to execute flawless, zero-friction cash transfers to rural villages, then providing exceptional standard customer service to your tech clients isn't struggle. It becomes a built-in worldview. That kind of culture is incredibly rare, and as the blueprint points out, rare cultures build legendary, resilient companies.
It also completely flips the script on how startups interact with extreme wealth. We talked earlier about wealth taxes and the friction they cause, but this foundation acts as a magnet for billionaires and philanthropists.
Because it solves the billionaire's dilemma. Many wealthy individuals want to give their money away, but they are paralyzed by the inefficiency of the NGO sector. They don't want to fund a bloated bureaucracy. This structure offers mathematically maximized precision. The pitch is clean. Help us put pure cash into the hands of the poorest humans alive instantly, with zero leakage.
It unifies people. Because ending extreme poverty through direct cash flow isn't a left-wing political crusade or a right-wing trickle-down theory. It bypasses the political warfare entirely. It is just clean, proactive engineering architecture.
It's the difference between reactive and proactive design. Traditional philanthropy is like waiting for a skyscraper to catch on fire, and then frantically organizing a bucket brigade to throw water at it.
Whereas this 30-30-30-10 equity model is like installing a permanent automated sprinkler system. It's tied directly into the city's main water line, built right into the structural steel of the building from the moment the concrete is poured. The moment a fire starts, the system automatically triggers.
That is the ultimate vision here. As we accelerate into this era of AI and robotics, abundance is inevitable. We're going to generate more wealth in the next 20 years than in the previous 200. But abundance without a design distribution loop is, as the text beautifully puts it, just a palace surrounded by slums. We cannot build trillion-dollar companies and simply cross our fingers, hoping the prosperity will magically trickle down.
We have to wire the prosperity into the architecture of success from day one. Man, we've covered a massive amount of ground today. We started by diagnosing the trillion-dollar paradox, the glass vault where immense technological wealth exists completely isolated from brutal human suffering. We debated the limitations of our legacy tools, the capital flight of wealth taxes, the operational bloat of traditional NGOs, and the sluggishness of government welfare.
And we deeply explored the alternative, the 30-30-30-10 formula. We saw how the 30% teen pool relies on strict anti-dilution and transparent equity layers to empower the labor force. And we unpacked the profound psychology of the split, where leaders retain control but voluntarily transcend their wealth. And finally, we saw how the 10% Foundation utilizes biometric and digital payment rails to treat extreme poverty simply as a solvable cash flow problem.
It is a breathtaking reimagining of what capitalism can actually be. So we arrive at the final question. What does this mean for you, the listener?
If we are truly standing on the precipice of an age of abundance, powered by artificial intelligence, then the real bottleneck of the 21st century isn't technological innovation. We have the tech. The bottleneck is imagination. The blueprint we've discussed today exists, but it requires human choice to implement it. So ask yourself, if you are founding a company tomorrow, or advising one, would you have the courage to permanently give away 10% of your equity to strangers, simply because it is the mathematically and morally correct way to design the future?
Think back to holding that steering wheel. You have the power to design a monument to your own ego, or you have the power to design an infrastructure that feeds the world around it. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Remember, the journey to $1 trillion valuation should be just as transformative as the destination itself. We'll catch you on the next one.